Welcome to the Pull the Chute podcast with Jeff and Jana. This is our weekly venture into the world of small to medium-sized businesses and the entrepreneurial spirit that drives success.
So our goal here is to help you grow and to be the best you can be, both in business and personally. To do that, we identify and we discuss topics that will hopefully help you as you work to build a successful business.
We also interview business owners and executives. It's our hope that you may be able to gain insight on ways to help you be a better leader and provide a better culture for your people.
Our mission here is to help you pull the chute once a week to work on your business instead of always working in your business.
So we hope you find these discussions insightful, helpful, and useful.
And thanks for your support. We hope you enjoy today's podcast.
Well, welcome everyone to the Pull the Chute podcast with Jeff and Jana. Hey, Jana, how are you doing today?
I am good. It's a beautiful day.
It is. We have beautiful skies here today. So we're excited today. We have Norman Wolfe with us today. And what I'm excited about is he's got a very unique process that he's going to talk to us about, the living organization. And I'm really excited to hear more about that. Norman, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jeff and Jana. It's a pleasure to be here. I wish it was sunny by us as well, but it's not. It's overcast.
not.
It's a little chilly. So
Where are you?
I'm in the Portland metro area, just
okay.
across the river in Vancouver, Washington. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And fall is upon us.
Yeah.
I love it. Yep.
Yeah, they were showing, I'm actually in Chicago right now visiting family, and they were showing some of the leaves changing, and boy, are they beautiful. You know, it happens a little
so
sooner
great.
here.
Yeah. I'm in Nashville, so we're kind of at all 3 points.
Yeah, right. We're all over the place today. So Norman, do us a favor for our listeners. Just give us a brief background of you and how you got to today. And then let's start talking about what this living organization is.
Brief background. Grew up in Brooklyn, New York. Spent my whole first part of my life in New York City. I went to New York University, graduated there, went to Pratt & Whitney Aircraft as a systems engineer, computer guy. Got connected with HP and then moved to Southern California. Spent 15 years with HP, kind of climbing the corporate ladder. Then reached a point both in my career and in my life where time to leave the big corporate ship, the mothership of security, or so, the illusion
that happens.
And decided to go out on my own. So since 1988, I've been consulting, so quite a long time. And most of my consulting has focused, especially in the last couple of decades, on helping organizations go from where they are to where they want to be. Some people call that strategy execution, but it's just simply, we're here now, this is who we are, we want to become this in the future. How do we get there, and how do we get there effectively? In around 2004, 2005, as I was really focusing on this whole notion of strategy execution, I realized that the statistics for the last couple of decades, which is probably going on 3-4 decades now, is about 70% of organizations fail to achieve their strategies.
Wow.
And the consistency of it is what really drew my attention, especially with such a wealth of information we've had, going back to the 70s with Tom Peters and In Search of Excellence, through Good to Great, through Terms of Endearment, and
Yes.
Daniel Pink's book Drive. And I mean, we just have an abundance of knowledge on how to run organizations more effectively, and nothing's changing. And that's when I realized that it's what Joel Barker calls the paradigm, the way we frame what life is and our role in it.
Mhm.
And it kind of frames our decision making and our sense of reality, and realize that we view the organization as a machine of production. It's something that simply is designed. Think of it like a black box. As a matter of fact, I was taught that way, that think of your organization as a black box. It takes inputs and produces outputs. And your goal as a leader is to design how that box works. So it's really like designing a machine. Highly efficient, and it's really good for streamlining and optimization, not very good for getting the most out of the people in the organization. That's its negative byproduct, if you will.
Yes.
Excuse me. So I began to look at it from my experience, the 30% that was successful, And I realized that we all had a different way of looking at it, like a different worldview or different framework, um, which I wrote about in the book called The Living Organization. And for the last decade now, almost decade and a half, I've been promoting the Living Organization as a new way of leading, a new way of seeing, and a new way of creating results.
That's fascinating, Norman. So talk a little bit about some of your principles in the living organization. I know it centers around the people rather than the process, which is
Well,
just my big thing.
actually not completely true. I look at it as an integration of the hard side and the soft side of business. One
Okay.
of the problems that I've seen in trying to influence the business model or the machine model is the fact that we bifurcated the world. So a leader, put yourself in a CEO's seat for a minute, and here I have limited resources, and I've got to create results. That's the
Mhm.
number one principle of the living organization, that a leader's number one responsibility is to create the outcomes necessary to ensure long-term uh, growth and sustainability.
Mhm.
So we can't negate the importance of creating outcomes. We can't negate the importance of business results.
Right.
Uh, so we have to integrate the two. That now the second principle of the living organization is that when a collective of people come together, they actually create a third or another living entity.
Mhm.
Think of your sales department and think of your finance department or your engineering department. Those are two typically, most people describe them in terms of attributes of a person. Like my sales department is outgoing, it's creative, and my engineering department is highly analytical
Mhm.
and reserved and structured and logical, and my sales department are not very logical, but they're very, relationship or so these are attributes of people. And so I took that concept and said, well, and did some research, and there's a lot of proof that a collective of people who come together for a common purpose actually gives birth to another a, a living body that is both part of but separate from the individuals within it.
Mhm.
So that's our second principle is that and once you create that, then the question is how do we create results leads you to the question of how do human beings create results,
Mhm.
which is very different than the machine. Machine creates results simply by how it's designed. Human beings create results by what we do, which is the mechanistic part of us. We still kind of have that component, but also by our relationships
Mhm.
and also by our context. And those are three key elements. And the context is our underlying belief systems
Mhm.
that uh, that causes us to behave in certain ways in response to life. In people, we call it some people call it our knee-jerk reaction. If something happens, you don't think about how to respond, you just respond. We've been
Right.
optimized through years and years of experience to respond in a way that we think will make us successful. Um, Organizations do the same thing. They optimize themselves to respond to situations, whether it's a situation with a supplier, situation with the customers, or even situations internally. This happens, this is how I respond,
Mhm.
which makes us very efficient. Problem is, if the context that drives our behavior is not consistent with the outcomes we want to get, we've got to modify the context to modify the behavior. And where that really comes into play is anytime I create a new strategy,
Mhm.
I have to create new behaviors because, as the saying goes, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting new results is insanity. But if I recognize, and this is where the living organization framework really helps leaders, if I recognize what drives behaviors, which is the context, which is the set of narratives we have collectively, then I have to spend time changing that narrative in support of the new behaviors I want. Otherwise, I won't get there. So that's our third principle is activity, relationship, and context is what drives outcomes. Our fourth principle is the fact that we look at since an organization is a living person and and people are in relationships, then rather than look at our suppliers and customers as separate transactions that we do, think of it as part of an ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm in relationship with my ecosystem. I'm as dependent on my customers as they are on me. I am as dependent on my suppliers as they are on me. We are connected in a set series of relationships. Even my stakeholders, like my bank or my investors, that's a set of relationships, not a set of transactions. So looking at it as an ecosystem helps us understand how we can manage the whole ecosystem. And if you really look at today's world, the boundaries in the ecosystem are really blurring. Like I have one client who's a fairly large company, but they only have 53 employees, if you count their W-2 employees.
Mm-hmm.
If you watch how they operate, for example, in the marketing department, they have 2 people, but they outsource to agencies.
Yes.
They treat the agency as if it's a department within their marketing department. So just because they're not W-2 employees doesn't mean they're not part of the collective of people trying to accomplish something. They're very much integrated into the way they operate. Same thing with their engineering department. They use a lot of outsourced engineering functions. But the engineering manager holds regular meetings with his team, but they just happen to be a lot of people outside the formal organization, if you will.
Well, and it seems like they're doing that a lot more too, Norman. Like
Exactly right.
there's all these subcategories you think about. I mean, that's what's happened. That's the big difference in business in the last, 15 years is
That's right.
people are outsourcing their, virtual assistants, their marketing departments,
That's right.
even their production.
Even their
to some
production
degree.
departments, engineering
Yeah.
departments, you see it
Yeah.
all over the place. So we recognize that and say, if you treat them like an ecosystem rather than a set of, supplier customer relations, which are mostly transactional based, and now you've got an ability to draw on a lot of resources, they become more like partners rather than subcontractors.
Yeah, so
Uh,
then there has to be clear communication between all of these entities, right? So that's kind of what Jeff and I were commenting on before we had you on is like a living organization then breathes and I mean it all has to sort of be on the same page with their communication and with their expectations and all of that because it's now one big ecosystem rather than just these little
Exactly right.
subcategories.
That's
And that's what
exactly
the
right.
book is about, I assume, or that's kind of what you're. Yeah.
Well, that's part of it. It looks at the whole thing. So, in order to facilitate that, we need to be able to look at how we set up these relationships and what's important to it. So one of the key elements we have is we call it the strategic compass. Now, in more traditional language, that would be thought of as mission, vision, values.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But we look at it as the strategic compass because it's really not a set of statements as it is about who we are and how we want to be in the world. So it's more personified, if you will. It's more like talking about a person rather
Yes.
than a
Yes.
machine. And we apply that to an organization so that when we are dealing with a ecosystem partner, they understand what the purpose of our relationship is. They
Yes.
understand what we're trying to accomplish together. So you're right. The nature of an ecosystem is heavily dependent on the relationship aspect.
Mm-hmm.
And the relationship aspect is heavily dependent on setting the right context so that we're all aligned together and we're all working to the common goal. And we all have the same core values, if you will, the same way we want to relate to others. So that there's a cohesion in the ecosystem.
So, and how do you then teach or coach or discuss that kind of communication or that kind of similar context, let's say?
Well, first you have to know what it is. So when we work with a client, for example, we spend time developing the strategic compass. And it's got 4 elements to it. It's got the what we call the soulful purpose. It's got the mission, and let me differentiate that by telling you a little story. I had a partner back in the early 90s, and we came together because we both had the same vision of what we wanted to accomplish with businesses. We were both consultants, but
Like Jeff and I. Yeah.
it didn't work out because in the end, while we had the same purpose, we had very different missions. And my wife at the time said, the difference between you and Doug is he wants to go around planting trees in the Amazon in urban centers, and you want to build nurseries.
Yeah.
You both want to green the planet. That's your common purpose, but you're going about it in very different ways. And
Mhm.
that made us incompatible. So you got to be clear on your purpose. And that's usually a very broad kind of thing, and it's very deep and meaningful. And it's not a statement. See, we differentiate because we look at it as the energy of the living person,
Mhm.
the animating spirit, if you will. We want to get down to that level of connection, of feeling about it. Not just a statement you put on the wall that's been wordsmithed and everybody feels good about it
Right.
for the moment, but they don't really connect to it and don't know what it really means. So we have the soulful purpose, the mission, the we call it the future impact. It's not a vision statement, but it's really a narrative, a story about the changes we're making in the world,
Mhm.
right? So it's a vision, but it's a story, it's a picture, it's a song, it's a poem, it's a narrative, which is again we're trying to engage the energy of the group. In the fourth element we call the character of this living person. It goes beyond just the value statements. It's like who do we want to be while we're doing what we're doing?
Mhm. Mhm.
That's our strategic compass, and I hope I've communicated the sense of depth of it, not just like I said, a set of statements.
Well, this is what I think. Norman, it sounds like it's a very soulful, sort of heartfelt way to look at a business organization. It's really cool. It's like,
It's very different.
yes, it's different, and that's the word that comes up to me is it's very soulful because so
Yes,
often business is so structured and
that's right.
you've got to do this and in order to get to D from A, you've got to sell hard and you've got to make sure that it's just all of this stuff that's not soulful and not tangible and not very soulful is the word that comes to mind. I
It's
feel
not human, it's a machine.
yes, it's
That's
not
the
you.
fundamental difference. Soulful only applies to humans. Machines are not soulful by definitions.
Right, right. So it's a really cool
Yeah,
concept as to
that's
how to look at
yeah.
business.
Right.
Yep.
And it almost feels like it's the why you do what you
Yes.
do, how you do it, what you're doing to
Yeah.
get to that ultimate end, right?
Yeah, and the reason that's important is there are people who say I wrote this blog and I'll use this as a kind of a metaphor to explain some of the differences that you can experience this way. There's a lot of talk about how the stakeholder model and how people are, employees are an important stakeholder. And I wrote a blog that says employees are not stakeholders. And the essence of the blog says stakeholders are something other than the organization.
Mm-hmm.
But employees are the cells, they're the living cells of the organization. You can
Yes.
take away investors, you can take away the bank, you can take away customers, you can take away suppliers, you can take away all the stakeholders, and you can still have an organization.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
You
very
can't take
true.
away the employees and have an organization.
That's right.
You
That's
take
right.
away the living cells of the organization, and there's no organization, right? It's just nothing there. And so it's important to think of the employees in a whole different way because they are not just in the traditional model, they're stakeholders of the leadership team, of the
Mhm.
owner,
Mhm.
and that's a separation. In the living organization model, they're not stakeholders, they are the organization. And
Mhm.
that changes the relationship between leaders and employees. They become part of the same
Entity.
social
Yeah.
purpose, the same entity. They have different roles, but they're equal in their importance, right? They're not equal in responsibility, but they're equal in importance. Everybody has the same game
Right.
Yes.
in our model.
Well, and you know what's cool about that to me is that, you know, when Jan and I teach leadership, one of the things that we always say is, look, you don't have to be in charge of someone to be a leader, right?
No.
You can be a peer and be a leader with your peers, and that says a lot. And that's kind of what you're describing.
Yeah,
Yes.
one of the phrases we use is we defined leadership as a leader is somebody who has influence over others.
hmm
That's the simplest definition of leadership. And if you look at that, lots of people have influence over others. I could be a peer and I have an influence over you,
hmm
not because I'm in a position of authority, just because I'm bringing value to you.
hmm
And that's really what we want leaders to do, is bring value to the organization. You go back to Greenleaf's servant leadership. That's really what he talks about, is bringing value to others, bringing value to a group, bringing value to customers, bringing value to helping people grow and develop.
Right.
And that's actually the fifth element, the fifth principle of, or is it the sixth? I've lost count. And that is when I look at an organization and go back to the first principle, leaders have to create or ensure the organization produces the results necessary for growth. And we know that the people of the organizations, the living cells, are the one that's actually producing the outcomes.
They're doing the work.
So as a leader, I want to make sure that we can increase the capacity to perform or to execute. And if you look at it from a point of view of this is a living entity with living cells, then the capacity to execute is equal to the capabilities plus the maturity. And that's an element that's not taken into account in the traditional model. We just look at the skill sets because we're just a machine for doing things. We're just a doing machine, right? But people are not doing machines. People have a level of maturity. I use the word maturity to cover things like how well can I understand the big picture in my role in it? How well can I deal with change and uncertainty? How well can I interact with people with very different points of view? Can I learn from the different points of view and grow myself? And how well can I be self-reflective? How well can I own my own mistakes and learn from them and grow from them and not try to resist, growing? So, if you look at those elements, I actually put together a maturity assessment to be able to measure this because nothing existed. I worked with a couple of professors to help me create it over the last, actually, it's now going on 5 years. And I'm in the beta testing phase. And I asked a couple of my clients to rank the maturity of their leadership team, just gut feel, and see, scale of 1 to 5. And then I had them take the assessment to see if there was a correlation. And fortunately, there was a strong correlation.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I mean, 5 years, it's good to know it works. But the point I wanted to make was it helps them, and when they were going through the gut feel, what I discovered, and this is how I created the assessment, is when a leader tries to think of who's going to be promoted, they're not looking at the capabilities. They're looking at the maturity. They may not use that term, but they're looking at things like how well do they get along with people? How much can they appreciate other people's point of view? How well do they own their own mistakes and take responsibility and accountability? These are attributes that tell us this person has the ability to help run the organization.
Yeah.
So we know instinctively that maturity is an important element, but nowhere was I able to find a maturity aspect of people or leadership development. There was no definition of it, no explanation of it, or anywhere in the business literature. So I had to create one.
Good for you.
Fortunately, I found some professors who were interested in that and helped me along the way.
That's
But
great.
but again, so when we think of, from a machine point of view, if we think of the capacity to execute, we think of capital equipment or the number of resources or the number of people we have and the capabilities of these machines. In the living organization, we think of the capacity to execute as the capability and maturity, which changes the role of people development, right? Because now I'm not just giving them feedback on their on their skill set and how well they executed this particular project, but I'm giving them feedback on them as people and helping them grow as human beings.
Yeah, yeah.
Which brings us to the seventh principle, is what we call as leader as coach consultant. It's a term I've heard years ago, and I decided to
Consultant.
use it.
Yeah.
It's the notion that a consultant gives guidance and direction, right? They sort of the experts that have the answers. A coach is somebody that facilitates you
Mhm.
in developing yourself as a person. When when we're dealing with a person in given situations in business, you sort of need a combination of both. You need to balance them. Sometimes I have to give you clear direction and make sure you get good, solid feedback about your performance in getting things done. Other times I want to be able to coach you and work through those personal development issues that are so difficult. And you guys work with leaders all the time and training leaders, so that's a key element
Sure.
of what a leader has to learn how to do. So those are the 7 principles.
Awesome. Well, Norman, thank you
Yeah.
so much for sharing. Did you have one more question, Jana?
No, I think
Okay,
no,
great.
I think this is excellent. It's great. I want you to send me a copy of your book.
Okay, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, that would be
Send me
great.
send me your address and I'll send you a signed
All
copy.
right. Well, we love
I
it. We
love
love
My
it.
pleasure.
Norman,
Yeah.
thank you so much for sharing your insights. The Living Organization is just an amazing insight into what we need to do as leaders and as just human beings, really, right? And how we
Yes.
can make that work. So thank you for
Yep.
sharing that. We appreciate
Yeah,
it.
my pleasure. It's really a pleasure.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. To our listeners out there, Norman, if people want to get a hold of your book, how can they do it?
Well, the book's on Amazon, so The Living Organization by Norman Wolfe on Amazon.com. It's also on Barnes and Noble. It's also on Apple eBooks or
Okay.
Apple
Okay.
Books.
All right, good.
So it's on Kindle version and paperback. It's not in audio yet. I've got my mic here. I'm recording it.
I love it.
Trying to get an audiobook version.
Good for
We're
you.
also in the midst of writing the second book now, which probably be out in a year or so, which talks about leading the living organization or the living organization leader, because there's some skills that have to go with this. There's some new skills that leaders need to be able to focus on it, which we may want to
Sure.
talk about at another time since you guys are into leadership.
Yeah.
Absolutely love it.
And they can also get the first 3 chapters of the book for free by going to quantumleaders.com/podcast.
Great.
Awesome. Wonder Norman, thank you again so much. Appreciate it. For those of you that are listening, we hope that you go find the book and can get it and support Norman as well. But Norman, thank you again for your insights. We really enjoyed
Thank
it
you for
today.
having me, Jeff.
That's great.
It's been a pleasure.
And to all our listeners, as Jen and I always say, thank you for the support, the continued support. It's because of you that we get to do this podcast, and we love it. So use it as a resource whenever you can. Until the next time, stay safe and be healthy.